Welcome, everyone. We are truly proud to premiere the Inkwell Awards 9th live awards ceremony at our home here in Oaks, new home here, in Oaks, Pennsylvania, at the Great Philadelphia Comic-Con. Thank you profusely for joining us here in support of our new host show. For those unfamiliar with our organization, it's an official 501c3 nonprofit advocacy group with almost 100% of funds raised going towards our programs and operations. Neither I nor whose phone was this again? Neither I nor anyone in our committee has ever received a salary or monetary compensation, just to put that out there. Our unique mission, the only one like it in the multiverse, as I said earlier, is to promote the misunderstood art form of comic book inking and educate the public and show appreciation for the best ink artists by recognizing them here. Since we're new at this venue, and many of you only recently heard of us, I'm going to forego my usual comedy killing routine and briefly bring up to speed, which I have been doing, but I'll read through this fast just in case I miss something or there are late visitors. Ink artists, aka inkers, were a role created in the comic medium, similar to inking animation cells, and were originally used at the dawn of the sequential medium as a means of speeding production. The pencil art needed to be redrawn in black ink for printing, and publishers would use a separate artist as part of an assembly line. So while one person penciled a page, another could ink the previous one, or to turn out the book faster. It didn't take long for some artists to become better at one or the other process, and those inkers that were good did much more than just trace. They became finishers and embellishers, able to turn the barest of sketches into completed ink drawings. They added depth, form, mood, lighting, and enhanced readability to the pencil pages, turning them into true storytelling art rather than just being printable pieces. Credits for inkers didn't show up at Marvel and DC until about the 1960s, much later for smaller publishers, and never for some. But when they were credited, since the layperson didn't have a reference point as I got into earlier, there's always been some ambiguity from fans and pros alike. Over the decades, ink artists have been tasked with bringing out the best of their pencil partners, with both artists contributing in their own right to the excellence of the line art in comics as the paper and the printing improved over the decades. So did the ink work, which could be printed with much more line diversity and clarity. Inking became an art form, bringing more quality control in rendering and enhancing the storytelling. These artists were becoming more recognized. That is until about 20 years ago. That is when someone figured out that Photoshop could theoretically replace inking by simply cleaning up more meticulous pencil drawings and darkening the graphic lines in levels to print them successfully. The process was sometimes mistakenly called digital inking, but that was a misnomer, an insult to actual ink artists. The true digital inking involves the same inking skills, just using pressure-sensitive pen and tablet tools instead of a brush or pen with actual ink. By also using computers to render a painted look to the color rather than the old school flat colors, the inker could be eliminated, they realized. This would supposedly save the publisher money, though not necessarily time, since the penciler and the colorist often had to do more. But this altered process didn't often work as hoped because the art often would look dark and muddy and unclear in print. Traditional inking had contributed so much to the quality of the work over the years that many started noticing the difference and found the images disappointing. Around the same time that some publishers tried phasing out inkers, others marketing departments decided that ink artists were not a sales draw and subsequently changed the established industry traditions in regard to credits. Going off on here, just to elaborate, I think of guys like Terry Austin, who used to be on your X-Men Death of Phoenix trade paperback with his partners Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Imagine how he felt after years of being on that cover to suddenly have it pulled as he got his comps, if he got his comps. Same thing with John Beatty, who saved the first Punisher limited series when Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck had a problem with editorial and bailed, and John stayed behind to make the work look in sync with what was there when the fill-in artists came in. So these are the kind of things that occur these days with that kind of work. They removed their names from advanced solicitations and ads, as well as from covers of collected tomes that used to print the names of writer, penciler, and inker for years. In spite of this, artists often kept silent for fear of losing work in a smaller market. Inkers and our organization don't feel that ink artists are more important or special than any other involved craft. In fact, contemporary times color artists have justifiably become more credited and recognized for their increased contribution to the sequential medium. Inkers simply desire the comparable status to what they received for years before. One of the most unforgivable changes came from our industry's prestigious Eisners, our Academy Awards, who decided to do away with the Best Inker category years ago because it was, quote unquote, too confusing. Basically saying that everyone in this room, fan and pro alike, were not savvy enough to figure out what we do, to understand, to learn what the inker does. And they decided to instead change the category into Best Pencil and Inker Team, that would suffice. All it did was frustrate all those artists who now felt snubbed and disrespected. For several years, I've publicly offered the Inkwells expert resources in helping the Eisners with this matter. So far, there's not been any responses. If anyone in this room can help us get the word out, we'd love to proactively discuss it and assist them in reinstating the solo inking category. And we have our own credits council now, which makes us even more able to help with artist identification issues. So for those above-mentioned reasons and others, I formed the Inkwell Awards in 2008. The first 3 years, our voting results appeared only on our website, and then Shelton Drum, promoter of the Heroes Con, took us in so that we could have a live awards ceremony for more exposure and significant presence in our community. After 8 years of travel from my house, the home base in Massachusetts with Haley, to North Carolina and back, your very own Stan Konopka here at this show reached out to me on behalf of promoter Christopher Wirtz to set up a new arrangement, one where their show would seriously sponsor the bulk of our expenses, save us from travel time, 6 hours instead of 16 for a drive. I've never been so comfortable and supported in a relationship with the shows, the promoters. It's all about mutual respect. The show supports our mission, and they certainly love ink artists. A few season highlights I'd like to briefly mention. Our Dave Simons Inkwell Memorial Scholarship Award recipient from the Cooper School is normally announced in these ceremonies, but with the change of schedule, with the change of venues, we will not have that until 2 weeks from now, I think, May 3rd. So I'll be mentioning that in our next ceremony here. We have 2 educational fundraising events. One is the Joe Sinnott Inking Challenge, which was skipped this year, which I can only attribute to the, like I said, the season being 2 months truncated due to the show location schedule. And we have the Sinnott Inking Challenge Spotlight on David Finch, with thanks to our very own Eric Corpy. Where are you? He's watching Walden Wong's booth. So, anyway, he's the one that spoke with David with me. That project is just ending now, and those involved in with it. Oh, I'm sorry, jumped a sentence ahead. Those involve an artist and/or a publisher authorizing us to use pencil art for a splash cover or pinup, an ink artist volunteering to embellish a blue line printed version. These lovely pieces will be available in our eBay auctions in May, but this weekend you can come by our booth and see them in person, because we find the best way to educate about inking is the before and after. That's why the gifts we've run online have had people contacting me about how they couldn't wrap their head around what we do until they saw the flashing of each version, so they could see how different artists would bring to the table a different look. Sorry, Walden, you won't make the exhibit from what I understand, but we look forward to receiving that. Thank you. Before and after visuals still the best way to comprehend what we do. We also have former challenge events, which resulted in books collecting them at our booth. We had a couple of achievements this season, such as we changed our nomination process, deciding to invite artists to send in submissions of their work, best work in conjunction with our nominators coming up with their own choices. This puts us more in line with other award organizations. It went off well. We figured out a few ways that we can improve, and we'll certainly make it better next time. Second, we added veteran artists Rags Morales and Dan Parsons to our roster of supportive special ambassadors. While Dan is primarily known as an ink artist, we don't usually place inkers in our ambassador lineup. I'm asked this all the time. Why don't you have inkers in your roster? And my answer to them is that we'd be preaching to the choir. I feel that While ink artists would be happy in that role, a better alternative is to have creators from all positions supporting our mission in the community in solidarity. Editors, writers, color artists, pencils, and so on. It brings, I think, a better message. You are probably familiar with some of our names on the ambassador list, which I'll skip because I believe I just read that off. They help bring us exposure and credibility, which leads to more fundraising, right? Easy for me to say, fundraising and mission success. A final quick note to all of our speakers and award recipients. It's a tradition for our spokesmodel and hostess, Ms. Inkwell, to escort you to the podium. So when your name is called or you're a speaker coming up here, please wait for her. This year, our lovely and dedicated spokesmodels, as I briefly mentioned before, include veteran fan favorite Haley Skazagagny and Ms. Kathy Denise Taylor. Other members of our Inkwell committee here include, as I mentioned, Eric, Tom Schloendorn, mentioned also earlier, 10-year contributor, and Ray Burke, who had to stay home for that medical crisis. And like I mentioned here, he's been with me for 9 years, and he's more crushed than I am. It's been really difficult. Thankfully, we have the show's audiovisual guy, Jeremy. Jeremy, where are you? Back here. Right there. Who graciously rose to the occasion, I mean like in the last 48 hours, running Ray's slideshow, which we just talked about loading, in his place. Thank you. Thank you all.